accepted.
In 1879, the government funded Pratt's project, the first ever off-reservation boarding school for Native American children. His motto was to kill the Indian and save the man. What started there at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was nothing short of genocide, disguised as American education. Children were forcibly taken from reservations and placed into the school, hundreds, even thousands of miles away from their families. They were stripped of their traditional clothing, their hair was cut short. They were given new names and forbidden from speaking their native languages.
The principal tomorrow.
Mexican children were segregated throughout the Southwest. This begins in Orange County around 1913, when Mexican children were separated from Anglo-American children on integrated schools. And by 1919, the school district of Santa Ana decided to segregate Mexican children into their own schools. So in 1919, the first segregated school was established in Orange County, and after that, children were routinely segregated, so that by 1930 there were 15 Mexican schools distributed throughout the county. Orange County was not any different from other areas of the Southwest. Los Angeles routinely segregated Mexican children into what were called neighborhood schools. One study found that somewhere between 80 and 90% of all school districts segregated Mexican children in the Southwest.
Pretty much everything was segregated.
Thelma Mothershed, Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Carlotta Walls, Melba Patillo, Minnie Jean Brown, and Gloria Ray.
They became known as the Little Rock Nine. The 1954 Supreme Court ruling on Brown versus the Board of Education found segregation of schools unconstitutional. But as the Little Rock Nine approached the high school, segregationists swarmed the campus.
They got no business out here. It's our school, not theirs. They are down.
As the violence escalated, one schoolgirl, Elizabeth Eckford, was threatened by an angry mob chanting, "Lynch her, lynch her."
Silva's favorite English teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Davis, organized the mock funeral for Mr. Spanish.
I began the first grade. Must have been the first or second day of school. A teacher from another classroom went into my classroom, wrote the word Spanish on the blackboard, passed out a piece of paper to each student, and asked us to copy the letters on the blackboard. We each did what she asked. They were collected and put into this box. They marched us out to the flagpole area where they had already dug a hole, and when all the classes were assembled outside, they buried that box. And because everyone had wrote the word Spanish in their own piece of paper, they buried Mr. Spanish and told us from that day on we were not allowed to speak Spanish in school.
Later that day, one of Silva's older classmates vowed, "Nadie me va a quitar que hable el español. No one will take my Spanish away." A teacher overheard, and the fourth grader got paddled, as more would in years to come.
We were young, we were idealistic, we were fearless.
We knew we had a culture, we knew we had a history, and it wasn't being taught.
It was a struggle for self-determination.
We dressed similarly. You know, Puerto Ricans in the blacks at that time with the leather coats, the short skin pants.
Where colonialism has been imposed, it's enough.
All we're talking about is getting a better education.
That you could insist on the Puerto Rican Studies Department. How dare you?
And then we realized our power.
That we could make the impossible possible.
Qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera.
And at that time, we were also facing the Vietnam War. The dean that I had was constantly encouraging all the students that got in trouble, which were minority students. And he was just basically a recruiter for the Army and basically telling, hey, we don't want you to have any bad record. If you just join the service right now, we'll write the recommendation saying you're a good student and we'll back you up on your recruitment.
There were clear signs of prejudice and discrimination.
I remember vividly when I was an honor student being asked by the white counselor what my father did for a living. And me telling her, well, he's a laborer, he works with his hands. And then she told me, and I'll never forget this, these were the exact words, that is a very honorable profession. You should follow in your father's footsteps.
My homemaking teacher, she would say, you little Mexicans, you better learn and pay attention. This class is very important because, most of you are going to be cooking and cleaning for other people.
It was real clear to me that there was a definite tracking system. Some students went into the academia tracking and were being prepared to go to college. Others were being tracked into going into the shop classes, into the vocational areas. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with that, but you didn't have a choice. You were tracked into those areas.
It's a showdown in Arizona over the right to teach American history, American government, art, and literature from a Mexican-American perspective.
Culture clash tackles, looks like, what kind of issues would we call those? Social justice issues. So, racism, classism, xenophobia.
We see the forcefully, the will to act.
I want people to know that we're proud of our contributions from a Chicano perspective. We're proud of the contributions we made to this country. We think it's worthy of study.
Dominant narrative.
It bothers me when they're told that the United States is dominated by a white, racist, imperialist power structure that's out to oppress them as Latinos.
Are you teaching them that they really are the oppressed group?
We don't have enough time to be victims. We need to change the world now. So there's no pobrecito stuff in here. There's no poor me.
They're teaching them that they live in occupied Mexico, that Arizona, California, New Mexico, and some other states were taken from Mexico in 1848.
California, New Mexico, Arizona, we're part of Mexico at some point.
Yes.
So what's wrong with learning
Well, we
about
teach that in history, but they teach them that this is occupied territory, that it should be given.
One thing I want to be really clear about is that even before Hurricane Maria, schools in Puerto Rico were really struggling. For the past decade, each year, about 20,000 kids have been leaving the school system. Hurricane Maria doubled those numbers.
So you went from an under-resourced, struggling system to an under-resourced, struggling system deeply, profoundly damaged by the hurricane.
The vast majority of children in the school system are low income, and the education department is this vast bureaucracy that has a history of financial mismanagement. And even though these children are US citizens, the way the federal government funds them is very different from the funding formula that, say, children on the mainland receive.
Well, I think it goes to the politics of colonialism. Goes to the politics of the island being treated not as a state would be, but rather treated as a possession of the United States.
The federal government doesn't even publish Puerto Rico's graduation rate, and their test scores are really bad.
The NAEP scores this year, in 8th grade, there was not one student, not one, who demonstrated proficiency.
Psychologist Joy Lynn Suarez says all of Puerto Rico has been traumatized.
It's an island that's been ripped apart. These children were already dealing with so much violent surroundings, island that's bankrupt, people leaving. They just can take so much.
Suarez, who's also a consultant to the education department here, says she's seeing significant increases in rates of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and suicide attempts.
Family has been torn apart. We still have a lot of children that one of their parents is in the States and the other one is here. So a year in after the hurricane, I feel that we're still very, very present in hurricane mode still.
About an inference question, guys.
7th grade students in Jackson Heights, Queens are preparing for an exam. The Specialized High School Admissions Test, or SHSAT, is the sole requirement to gain admission to one of the 8 such high schools in New York City.
This year, Stuyvesant High School, the school with the highest cutoff score, made headlines when out of the nearly 900 slots that it had available, only 7 went to black students. So the test has become the center of a fierce debate between academic rigor, equal access, and diversity in New York's specialized high schools.
Black and Latino students make up 70% of the students in New York City, yet this year they received just over 10% of the offers from the 8 schools.
In constant fear, a new University of Houston study finds 2/3 of Harris County Latino students are scared of being deported. This constant state of worry may lead to mental health problems like anxiety, PTSD, or depression. Anayeli Ruiz takes a closer look.
It's a fear that immediately settles in. It's the best way to describe it is that you feel your whole body tense up and you think of the worst.
Meet Elliot Flores, a 20-year-old DACA student with so many hopes and dreams, but he lives in fear his family will be deported.
I don't know, man. For those who can't imagine what homelessness is like, I don't know. I can only explain what it's like in one day of my life, right? So I would come to school, a full day of school, and I would stay here for as long as possible, to 9, and then I would hit the street. I would have to leave, and sometimes I wouldn't have eaten the entire day. So apart from being hungry, there was also the worry of where am I going to go next, and it's like you're in a state of limbo.
It all goes